Let's talk about encapsulation. So encapsulation in object-oriented program methodology prevents access to implementation details, aka it allows us to do information hiding. Now, an example for it would be a phone. For example, a phone, you click a button, let's say the on button, and it just turns on the phone. Now, you don't know how this process takes place. You don't know the details of the process, yet you know that if you click this button, that'll happen, right? It'll turn on the phone. So, in other words, the implementation has been hidden from us, yet the functionality has been exposed out to us as a user. So at the end, we can access this functionality by clicking the button, and then it happens and we don't know how. So encapsulation is achieved through access specifiers. You already know about some of the access specifiers, such as public and internal. There's a couple of others, such as private and protected. And these are just some of the access specifiers that you can use to achieve encapsulation. Now, you might be confused about the difference between abstraction and encapsulation because they sound pretty similar. And in a very simple way, if you want to know the difference, is that encapsulation happens on a much lower level, and abstraction is the same concept, just on a much higher degree. So what do I mean by this? Encapsulation basically states what a class exposes and what a class hides. So it is on a class level, and then it's just limiting what the class can expose to the world and what it should keep inside. When it comes to abstraction, we're talking about higher degrees. Now, by that I mean interfaces or abstract classes, which we will be talking about a little later, but for now just know that it is happening on a higher degree. And abstraction uses encapsulation. So abstraction allows making relevant information visible, and encapsulation enables programmer to implement the desired level of abstraction. So if we bring back the phone example, right? Let's say we have Android and Apple phones, different types of phones. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but let's simplify our example and say that all phones in the world just have one button, and this button is the button that turns it on. Now, we can have different types of phones, and all these types of phones will have the same interface. That is abstraction, meaning that it's abstracting away the type of the phone. It just says as long as this phone is using this interface, something will happen when a certain functionality is called. But once again, it's abstracting the type of phone. So let's say we're using the same interface, and this interface says I just have an on functionality, on-off functionality. So and all the Android phones and all the Apple phones, they basically use the same interface and make all fancy phones. They all look different. They are different sizes and different shapes, but they use the same interface. And so the interface says that once you click this button, I will turn on, and if you click it again, I will turn off. Now then, through encapsulation, we're going to define the functionality, and we're going to hide the implementation details. So let's say for certain phones, something happens when you turn them on, and something different happens for other phones when you turn them on, right? This will be defined in the encapsulated classes, because the functionality will be different, yet it will be hidden for each type of phone. However, there will be one interface which will abstract away the type of phone. Now, this might be a bit confusing, so don't worry about it. In this example specifically, we're going to go over encapsulation, so just pay attention to that and try to understand first that, and then we'll understand abstraction later down the line. Okay, so with that said, let's actually go ahead and dive into encapsulation. So right now I have my project, Simple Web Scraper, and I have my person and super person classes from the previous example. Now let's actually go ahead and go into our person class and look at the access specifiers. See the properties, everything, the functions, all public, meaning that public access specifier means that anything outside of this class and inside of the class can access it. So if I want to make it so that it can only be accessed from within the class, the way I can do that is by changing it to private. And just that way, if I say private and private, this means that only the methods and other properties can access these two properties because they're private. That means they're only accessible within the class. And I just missed that. So now if I try to go to program and, you know, in person one, I try to say dot, you see, I don't have first name and last name anymore. So once again, if I use a dot notation, you will see I don't have access to it. I have access to the other methods that have access to first name and last name within the class, but I don't have direct access to first name. Let's actually go ahead and change only first name back to public. And I will go here and say dot. See, first name is now accessible. So we just hid a quote-unquote implementation, even though it wasn't much of an implementation, it was just a property, but still you see the concept. We were able to hide it from within the class, right? And this is the same basic concept that, let's say, phones use, right? When you click a button, it hides the implementation. Obviously, they don't use the same code, but the concept is the same. They hide some information that the user does not need to know about. Let's actually go back to the person and say public. So make this public. So you've seen two access specifier, public and private. By default, whenever you create a class, it is an internal. So the class is internal. An internal access specifier means that it can only be used within the project. So an internal means that, hey, it can be used by other classes other than this, right? So if we have superperson and we make something internal, let's say we make this internal, not interface, internal. And we'll make first name and last name internal. That means that we can still access it. So person1 dot first name and last name, we can still access them. However, if I try to create another project, so let's actually go ahead and do that. If I try to access it outside of a project that is defined in, then I can't access it. But before I even do that, I want to show you one thing. So I will turn person1's first name and last name to public. And since the person by default is internal, what I will do is I will create another project. So I will come here, say add new project, and then console app, I will say new project, right? And in this new project, as you can see, this is a program CS, so the entry point to the application. I will go ahead and say person. Well, first, what we need to do is we need to add reference so that the new project has all the stuff that it needs to access from Simple Web Scraper. So in order to do that, you can go to references, right click on that, add reference, and add reference to Simple Web Scraper. Now, Simple Web Scraper's stuff, meaning its classes, its properties, anything it has, we can access from the new project, right? It is dependent on, so new project is dependent on Simple Web Scraper. It is its dependency, right? So let's close this up, go to program, and let's say person, and person1 equals new person, and we can say John Smith. So Smith. Great. But see, we cannot access it. Now, if I go to person, which is in Simple Web Scraper, and I change this to public, you will see that I'm able to use it. So I'm able to import it. Let me go back once again. I don't want to import it yet. You see this option? It says using Simple Web Scraper. That means just like these, we're going to import that class into here. But you don't even have this option when the person is internal. So if I change this back to internal, you'll see here If I hover over, it's nowhere to be found because it's internal. It can only be used within this project. Now let's actually go back to the person and let's make it public. And then I'm going to come here and say using Simple Web Scraper. See, I have imported. I was able to import the class and I'm able to use it in another project. Now, this is great. And we can do this. It's going to work just fine. Now, remember person, the first name and the last name were public. So if I say person1 dot first name, I have access to it, right? Dot, you see first name and last name. And I also have access to, so actually let's do person1 dot first name equals, so Jane, and then let's say person1 last name equals Smith, but with 2 H's. How about that? I'm very creative today. So then if I go back to the program, which is in Simple Web Scraper, see the namespace will tell you where you're at. So here I will also kind of just copy this. I just want to show you the access specifier change that we're about to make. So first name and last name still public. If I go into the person and I change the first name and last name to internal, so I make this internal, right? So you can make your properties, your functions, your classes, all of them have access specifiers. So it doesn't matter if it's a class or a property, it can still have an access specifier. It's how you want to expose that outside of the class. So now these are internal. See, in here, I still have access to them. So it's all good in here. But if I go to new program, see, it says is inaccessible due to its protection level. Why? Because it's internal, so it can't be used outside of the project. Let's actually go back and change these to public. And now I'm going to show you one more access specifier, which is called protected, and that's a very important one to remember. So I'm actually going to take this out. I don't need that. And the super person now, I'm going to go to the person actually. I'm going to say first name and last name are protected. So what does that mean? So protected, let me show you. If I go to program and I say, not this one, sorry, this isn't the new program. If I go here, you see that the first name and the last name I can't access directly from the person. Why? Because they're protected. Protected means that these properties can only be accessed from within this class or from anything that's inheriting from person. So what is this other class that's inheriting from person? You are correct. It is in the super person. So if we go here, you will see that if I try to use, let's say in the fly method, right? If I come here and I say first name, I have access to it. I have access to it. I can do whatever I want. I can just say, I am flying, and just do this and say first name and also the last name. So this is absolutely possible because these are protected. But the moment I go to person and I change these from protected to private, remember what private does? It says that these properties or anything else that's private can only be used within the class. If I do that, then what's going to happen is I will lose access to these two. See? Inaccessible due to its protection level. So I can't use them in the class that it's inheriting from person. So if I go back and I change these to protected once again, everything will be great. And I can use them once more. So these are some of the access specifiers, and I just wanted to show you how they're used in an example, in an actual example. So you see also the power of it and how much you can do with these and how much you can use these to be able to hide certain things and expose other things that you need to expose to the user. Now, one other thing is, remember in our previous videos, we were forced for testing purposes to make classes public, just so that when we went to the testing class, we were able to access that class to be able to test it. Now, that's actually a bad practice, because we don't just want to change our access to the class or to the property or to whatever else just because we want to test it. You know, we don't want to do that. So there's a way around it, and that way around it is by using internals visible to attribute. So what we can do is we can go to our simple web scraper and open up our properties and go to assembly info. Assembly info just has a bunch of stuff about the project. That's all it is. And one of the other things that we can add, we can actually go ahead and copy this because we're going to be using the format of it. So it's assembly. And then the next is internals visible to. And then afterwards, within that, we're going to put in the name of the namespace of the project that we're trying to expose our internals to. In this case, it's new project. So the way you can do that is by right-clicking on the project properties, and then from the properties, assembly name, default namespace, you should get the assembly name and pop it in here. So that's internals visible to new project. What we're saying with this, right? So we changed the assembly info on Simple Web Scraper. What we're saying is that Simple Web Scraper's internals will be visible to a new project. And in this case, it's not a test project, but if it was a test project, the internals would have been visible to it. So then we wouldn't have to come to our person and be like, hey, you know, we have to make this public in order for it to be able to use it. So let's actually change this to internal once more. Close this and go to new program. And here, try to use person and see we have access to it. So person equals new person, and you know, John Smith, and we can do whatever we want with it. Even though this class is still internal, but we forced it to be kind of be able to use in this project by specifying it. By specifying the access in Simple Web Scraper. So actually go ahead and change it just to see, right? Right now we can use it, but what if we go to the properties, assembly info, and we change the name, like we say, hey, we misspelled the name, it's now new project 2. In this case, this wouldn't work. This will say person is inaccessible due to its protection level because it's internal. I mean, it's actually working properly. But in the assembly info, we changed it back to new project again. You see that it's going to be able to use it again because we specified that, you know what, override the access. We're in the Simple Web Scraper saying that new project can use all of our internals. That's very important stuff. Encapsulation might be a bit confusing, but as we start making our apps, you will learn more and more how to use it. It's very powerful, and abstraction also is very powerful. Object-oriented programming in general is just very, very powerful that will allow you to write some amazing applications. But for now, that's it.